Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Unknown Mystery Story, the channel where we delve into the stories that exist in the shadows of our everyday lives. The tales that remind us that behind the closed doors of the most normal-looking houses, the most unimaginable horrors can unfold. The story I'm about to share with you tonight is one of the most requested, and also one of the most difficult I've ever had to research. It's a story about a family, a home, and a secret sealed behind a closet door. It's a tragedy that forces us to ask a terrifying question. What if the monster we should fear most isn't a stranger in the dark, but the person we're supposed to love and trust unconditionally? This one is heavy, so take a deep breath. If you're new here and appreciate deep dives into complex, true crime narratives, please consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. You're not going to want to miss how this story concludes. Now, let's turn back the clock to a sweltering August afternoon in the quiet, leafy suburb of Maple Creek. Let's talk about the Vance family, and the day their world didn't just fall apart, it was devoured whole. Mark takes a sip of his coffee, his eyes dark with the weight of the story he's about to tell. The screen fades to black. The heat was the first thing you noticed. It was a physical presence in the Vance house that August, a thick, suffocating blanket that clung to your skin and made the simple act of breathing a conscious effort. It muted sounds, slowed time, and seemed to bake the silence into the very walls of their two-story colonial home. For 17-year-old Leo Vance, the silence was louder than the heat. His father, Richard, was on a business trip in Singapore, a 7-day affair of conferences and client dinners that left Leo in charge. "You're the man of the house now, champ," his father had said, clapping him on the shoulder with a brisk, almost formal affection. It was a role Leo was used to. His father was a ghost in their lives, a provider of funds and expectations, but rarely a participant in the messy, day-to-day business of being a family. That responsibility fell to his mother, Eleanor. Or at least it used to. She had been gone for 3 days. At first, it wasn't alarming. His mother was a creature of impulse and deep, rolling emotions. Sometimes the weight of the world, or just the weight of their quiet suburban life, would become too much. She would leave a note on the kitchen counter: "Needed some air. Be back tomorrow. Love, Mom," and drive to her sister's house 2 towns over. She'd come back 24 hours later, her eyes a little less haunted, her smile a little less brittle. But this time there was no note. Her car, a sensible blue sedan, was still in the driveway. Her purse was on the entryway table, its contents: wallet, keys, a half-eaten roll of mints undisturbed. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She's probably just at a friend's. Leo had told his 12-year-old sister, Clara, on the first night. Maybe she walked over to Mrs. Gable's. Without her phone? Clara had asked, her eyes wide and owlish behind her glasses. She was perched on a kitchen stool, watching Leo make macaroni and cheese from a box, a poor substitute for their mother's cooking. "Maybe it died," Leo had said, the lie tasting like chalk in his mouth. Now, on the afternoon of the 3rd day, the silence had grown teeth. The oppressive heat felt like a symptom of a deeper sickness within the house. And then there was the smell. It had started yesterday, a faint, cloyingly sweet odor, like forgotten groceries. Leo had taken out the trash, checked the refrigerator for spoiled milk, and even peered into the garbage disposal. Nothing. He'd opened the windows, but the humid August air did little to dissipate it. It seemed to be centered upstairs. Today it was worse, much worse. It was a thick, complex scent that caught in the back of your throat. It was organic and wrong. It was the smell of decay. Leo stood at the bottom of the main staircase, his hand resting on the polished wood of the banister. Upstairs, he could hear the faint hum of the vacuum cleaner. Clara. For the past 2 days, his sister had been on a frantic cleaning spree. She had scrubbed the kitchen floors, dusted every surface, and was now, apparently, vacuuming the upstairs hallway for the 3rd time. Her activity was a stark contrast to the house's heavy inertia. It was a manic energy, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that was quietly spinning out of control. "Clara," he called out. The vacuuming stopped. A moment later, her head appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face was flushed. Her blonde ponytail stuck to her forehead with sweat. "What?" she asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. "Have you seen Mom?" It was a stupid question. He knew the answer. She shook her head, a quick, jerky motion. "No. I told you. Can you smell that?" Clara's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear? No, something else. A guarded, defensive look that was unervingly adult. "Smell what?" "It just smells like dust. That's why I'm cleaning." She was lying. The smell was impossible to ignore. It coiled in the air between them, a tangible, unspoken truth. Why was she lying? "I'm going to look in her room again," Leo said, his voice firmer than he felt. He started up the stairs, each step a leaden weight. The smell grew stronger with every foot of elevation, pulling him forward like a current. "There's nothing in there," Clara said, trailing behind him. Her voice was thin. "I already looked." The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Leo pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was neat, almost sterile. The bed was made with military precision, the pillows fluffed. A book lay face down on the nightstand. On the dresser, his mother's jewelry lay in a small ceramic dish, her wedding band, a pair of pearl earrings, the silver locket Leo had given her for her 40th birthday. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the woman who belonged there. And the smell. Here it was overwhelming. It was a gut-wrenching miasma of rot and cheap air freshener. Leo saw the can on the dresser glade wild lavender. Someone had sprayed it, a futile attempt to mask the inevitable. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the source. His gaze landed on the walk-in closet door. It was closed. A cold dread, stark and absolute, washed over him, chilling the sweat on his skin. He felt the blood drain from his face. Couldn't be. It was the kind of thing that happened in movies, on shows like the ones Mark hosted on the internet. It didn't happen in Maple Creek. It didn't happen to him. "Leo, let's just go downstairs," Clara whispered. Her hand tugged at the back of his shirt. It was trembling. "Let's call Aunt Carol. Maybe Mom's there." He ignored her. He walked towards the closet door as if in a trance. The smell was emanating from it, seeping through the cracks around the frame. It was a living thing, breathing its foul breath into the room. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the house's suffocating silence. His hand reached for the brass knob. It was cold. "Leo, no," Clara pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please." He turned to look at his sister. Her face was a mask of pure terror. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she made no sound. Her eyes weren't just scared. They were begging him not to open the door, begging him not to see what she already knew was there. And in that instant, 1,000 little details of the past 3 days clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Clara's obsessive cleaning, her lies about the smell, her frantic energy, her desperate attempts to keep him out of this room. She wasn't a scared little girl wondering where her mother was. She was a guard, a gatekeeper to a nightmare. "What did you do?" Leo breathed, the words barely a whisper. The accusation hung in the air, monstrous and unbelievable. Clara just shook her head, her body racked with silent sobs. Leo turned back to the door. His hand trembled, but his resolve was firm. He had to know. He had to see. He turned the knob. The door swung inward. The smell hit him first, a physical blow that made him gag and his eyes water. It was the smell of finality. Then, his eyes adjusted to the dim light of the closet, and he saw her. His mother, Eleanor Vance, was slumped in the corner, wedged between a rack of summer dresses and a stack of shoeboxes. She was wearing the yellow sundress she'd worn to their neighbor's barbecue last week. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, her skin a pale, waxy color that didn't look real. Her open eyes stared at nothing, their usual warmth and light extinguished, replaced by a dull, milky vacancy. A dark, matted patch of hair above her temple told a story of violent impact. Time stopped. The world narrowed to that single, impossible image. His brain refused to process it, trying to reject the sight as a dream, a hallucination. This wasn't his mother. His mother was life and laughter and the scent of cinnamon. This was an object, a thing, a horror wrapped in a familiar yellow dress. A sound escaped his lips, a strangled, animal noise of pure anguish. He stumbled back, away from the door, away from the smell, away from the truth. He bumped into the dresser, sending the ceramic dish of jewelry crashing to the floor. The clatter of the wedding band on the hardwood floor was a gunshot in the silent room. He looked at Clara. She hadn't moved. She stood by the doorway, her face pale and streaked with tears, her expression one of utter, devastating resignation. She wasn't surprised. She was just watching him, her 12-year-old eyes ancient with a secret she had carried alone for 3 days. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the quiet of an empty house. It was the heavy, profound silence of the grave, a silence that had taken up residence in their home, in the space between two siblings. Leo's mind was a maelstrom of horror and disbelief, but one thought rose above the chaos, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. He looked at his small, trembling sister, the girl he'd taught to ride a bike and pushed on the swings. He looked at her, and he didn't see the innocent child he knew. He saw the person who had vacuumed the hallway while their mother's body decomposed 10 feet away. The phone was in his pocket. His fingers felt clumsy, numb, as he pulled it out. He didn't know who to call. His father? Aunt Carol? No, there was only one call to make now. He dialed 911. As the operator's voice came on the line, calm and distant, Leo's eyes never left his sister. The real murderer, the one everyone would condemn, wasn't some faceless intruder. The murderer was in the room with him. The murderer was family. And in that moment, Leo Vance knew his life was over. It had ended the moment he opened that closet door. The world outside the Vance house had dissolved into a silent film painted in strobing red and blue. Leo sat on the manicured front lawn, a coarse, woolen police blanket draped over his shoulders. It did nothing to warm the profound, internal chill that had settled deep in his bones. Paramedics, uniformed officers, and plainclothes detectives moved with a purpose that felt alien to him. They were actors on a set that had, until 3 hours ago, been his life. His home was now a crime scene, cordoned off by a garish yellow ribbon that fluttered mockingly in the humid evening breeze. He watched them lead Clara to a separate cruiser. She didn't cry or resist. Her small body was held ramrod straight, her face as impassive and pale as a porcelain doll's. A female officer with a kind face tried to put a reassuring arm around her, but Clara subtly shrugged it off. She looked less like a traumatized child and more like a deposed monarch being escorted into exile. The sight sent a fresh wave of nausea through Leo. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. His mind screamed it, but his mouth couldn't form the words. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see a woman in her late 40s, dressed in practical trousers and a dark blazer despite the heat. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, though tired, were incredibly sharp. They seemed to see everything, including the chasm that had just opened up inside him. "Leo Vance?" she asked. Her voice was low and steady, a grounding stone in the swirling chaos. "I'm Detective Isabella Rossi. I'm the lead investigator on this case." Leo could only nod, the blanket feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I know this is an impossible time," Rossi continued, crouching down to his level, "but I need to ask you a few questions while it's still fresh. Can you tell me what happened? From the beginning." And so he did. In a hollow, detached voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else, he recounted the past 3 days. The absence, the growing silence, the smell. He told her about Clara's obsessive, frantic cleaning, a detail that made Rossi's eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. He described their conversation on the stairs, Clara's denial of the odor, her desperate plea for him not to open the bedroom door. He detailed the horrific discovery, the sight of his mother, the fallen jewelry dish. He laid out the facts like cold, hard stones. He gave Rossi the what, but he couldn't bring himself to voice the who. The accusation felt too monstrous, too unnatural to speak aloud. To say, "I think my 12-year-old sister killed our mother," was to make it real, to give it a power he couldn't bear. But as he spoke, he could see the narrative taking shape in Rossi's intelligent eyes. He didn't need to say it. The story was telling itself. Miles away, in a sterile, softly lit room at the county's Child Advocacy Center, Clara Vance was giving the performance of her life. Seated across from a gentle, grandmotherly child psychologist and a uniformed officer taking notes, she was the perfect image of a terrified, grieving child. Tears, real and glistening, streamed down her cheeks as she clutched a stuffed bear provided by the center. "I was in my room," she whispered, her voice trembling convincingly. "I was reading. I heard them arguing downstairs. Mom and a man." His voice was deep, angry. The psychologist leaned forward. "Did you know this man, sweetheart?" Clara shook her head, her blonde ponytail swishing. "No, I never heard his voice before. They were shouting. About money, I think." Mom sounded scared. "She told him to get out." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "Then I heard a loud noise, a thump, like something heavy falling. Then it was quiet. So quiet." "What did you do then, Clara?" the officer asked gently. "I hid," she said, her voice cracking. "I pushed my dresser in front of my door and I hid in my closet. I was so scared. I stayed there for a long time. When I finally came out, the house was quiet. The front door was open a little bit. And the man was gone." "Did you look for your mother?" the psychologist asked. "I called for her," Clara sobbed. "But she didn't answer. I went to her room. The big closet door was closed. I was too scared to open it. I thought maybe she ran away from the bad man. I thought she would come back. I just wanted her to come back." She buried her face in the stuffed bear, her small shoulders shaking. It was a masterful story, filled with detail and emotion. A story of a masked intruder, of a violent argument, of a child paralyzed by fear. To the two adults in the room, it was a tragic but plausible account. They saw a victim. They had no reason to see anything else. The call reached Richard Vance at 3 a.m. Singapore time, as he was networking over overpriced cocktails. One moment he was the picture of corporate success. The next he was a hollowed-out man on the first flight back to a life that no longer existed. He arrived at the Maple Creek Police Department 22 hours later, his expensive suit rumpled, his face a gray mask of grief and jet lag. By default, the grieving husband was the primary suspect. Detective Rossi and her partner grilled him for hours in a cold interrogation room. His alibi was airtight flight manifests, hotel keycard records, dozens of witnesses from the conference. He couldn't have been within 8,000 miles of his wife at the time of her death. With that established, Rossi's questions shifted. "Mr. Vance, what was the state of your marriage?" Richard flinched. He looked down at his hands, at the gold wedding band that now felt like a brand. "It was strained," he admitted, his voice raspy. "I travel a lot. Too much. Ellie Eleanor, she was lonely." "Was she unhappy?" Rossi pressed. He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with a guilt that was almost as profound as his grief. "She was sick, detective. She had been for about a year. Depression. Severe anxiety. She wouldn't let me tell anyone. Her sister knew, but that was it. She saw a doctor, had medication, but she had good days and very, very bad days. She put on a brave face for everyone, for the kids. But she was struggling. Deeply. This was the first major piece of the puzzle that didn't fit Leo's unspoken narrative. It painted a picture of a family that wasn't just quiet, but actively concealing a deep and painful secret. It opened up new, terrible possibilities. Had Eleanor, in a moment of despair, taken her own life? Had there been an accident? Had her illness caused her to provoke a fatal confrontation with someone? Richard Vance's confession of emotional neglect didn't make him a murderer. but it made him a key witness to the fragile psychological state of the victim. "I should have been there," he choked out, his corporate composure finally shattering completely. "I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to fix her. And now she's gone." He put his head in his hands and wept, a man mourning not just his wife, but all the chances he'd lost to save her. Leo was adrift in the guest room of his Aunt Carol's house. The room was decorated in floral patterns and pastel colors that felt suffocatingly cheerful. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped in a waking nightmare. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the inside of the closet. He saw his mother's vacant eyes, the unnatural angle of her head. The image was burned onto the back of his eyelids. Then he would see Clara's face, her impassive, adult-like expression as she was led away, her lie about the smell, her manic cleaning. His mind was a battlefield. One side, the loving older brother, desperately clung to the intruder story. It was plausible. It had to be. His 12-year-old sister was not a monster. She was just a scared kid. He tried to remember her as she was a week ago, a year ago, the girl who loved comic books and drew horses, the girl who still sometimes snuck into his room when there was a thunderstorm. But another, darker voice, the voice of the boy who had opened the closet door, gnawed at him. It forced him to remember other things, unsettling details from the past year, details that had seemed like nothing at the time but now glowed with a sinister light. He remembered finding a bird in the backyard with its neck broken, and Clara's bizarrely clinical explanation that she was just seeing how it worked. He remembered an argument she'd had with a neighborhood kid, ending with her whispering a threat so vicious and cold it had made Leo's blood run cold. He remembered the drawings she'd started making no longer of horses, but of dark, swirling figures with no faces. Was he crazy? Was grief making him invent a monster out of his own sister? He felt a profound, soul-crushing guilt for even entertaining the thoughts. He was supposed to protect her. Now, his father was broken, his mother was dead, and he was all she had left. And he was suspecting her of the unthinkable. Detective Rossi was not governed by guilt or grief. She was governed by facts. And the facts were not lining up with Clara's story. First, there were no signs of forced entry at the Vance home. The locks were intact, the windows secure. The masked intruder would have had to have been let in. Second, the medical examiner's preliminary report was in. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall against a hard, sharp object like the corner of a dresser. There were no other signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds on Eleanor's hands or arms. It looked less like a violent fight and more like a single catastrophic impact. Third, forensics had finished their sweep. They found the can of Glade Wild Lavender in the master bedroom's wastebasket. As Leo had stated, it was an attempt to mask the smell. It was covered, almost exclusively, in Clara Vance's fingerprints. The final two pieces came on the 5th day of the investigation. The first was from a luminol test in Clara's own bedroom. On a rag stuffed deep in her hamper, forensics found trace amounts of blood mixed with a household cleaning agent. The blood type matched Eleanor's. Clara hadn't just been cleaning the hallway. She had been cleaning up evidence. The second piece was the one that made Rossi's heart sink. It was the reason she called Leo down to the station. She sat across from him in the same soft interview room where his sister had spun her tale. She slid a photograph across the table. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "we know the intruder story is a lie. We've been piecing it together. The lack of forced entry, the Emmys report. We know someone tried to clean up. We know your sister lied about the smell." Leo stared at the picture. It was a close-up of the door jamb of the walk-in closet in his parents' room. Highlighted in the photo was a small, smudged handprint, made in the dark, dried blood of his mother. It was low to the ground at the height a small child would reach. The print was found on the inside of the door frame. "Leo," Rossi said softly, driving the point home. "It was left by someone small, pushing the door closed from the inside. We ran the print. It's a perfect match for Clara." Leo's breath hitched. His world, which had already been fractured, now shattered into microscopic dust. The image was undeniable. It was a photograph of the truth. His sister hadn't been hiding from a monster. She had been hiding a body. She had stood in that dark closet, with their dead mother at her feet, and had calmly pushed the door shut, sealing the horror inside. He looked up from the photo, his eyes meeting Rossi's. The last vestiges of his denial, the final desperate hopes of the protective older brother, crumbled away. All that was left was the cold, sickening, absolute certainty of what his sister had done. "We need you to help us understand why." "Leo," Rossi said, her voice full of a sorrow that mirrored his own. "A 12-year-old girl doesn't do this for no reason. Something happened in that room, and she's the only one who can tell us what." The photograph of the small, bloody handprint lay on the table between them, a silent, damning testament. It wasn't just evidence. It was the period at the end of a sentence Leo had been refusing to read. The world outside the interview room, the hum of the police station, the distant traffic faded away. All that existed was the horrifying clarity the photo provided. His denial had been a dam, and that image was the final crack that brought the entire structure crashing down. He looked at Detective Rossi, his eyes pleading for an alternative, for some other explanation that his heart could accept. He found none. He found only a weary empathy and the unyielding weight of the truth. "A formal interrogation will break her," Rossi said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It will cement a narrative of a monster, and I don't believe that's what she is. I believe she's a terrified child who did a terrible thing and has been drowning ever since. Her father, he's in no shape to reach her. You are the only one left who can, Leo. You are the only one who might be able to bring her back to the surface." Beside Rossi sat Dr. Anya Sharma, the child psychologist who had first interviewed Clara. Her expression was one of profound sadness. "He's right, Leo," she said, her voice gentle. "If you go in there with accusations, she will retreat completely. But if you can connect with her, not as a suspect, but as her brother who is also grieving, you might open a door. Don't ask what she did. Ask her what happened to her. Ask her what she was afraid of." The idea was terrifying. To face his sister, knowing what he now knew, and not scream. To look into her eyes and see both the little girl who loved horses and the gatekeeper of their mother's tomb. But Rossi was right. He was the last one. He owed it to his mother to understand, and maybe, in some twisted way, he owed it to the sister he once knew to try. He gave a single, slow nod. The room they brought him to was painted a soft, calming blue. There were 2 comfortable chairs, a small table, and a box of tissues. It was designed to feel safe, but to Leo it felt like a cage. He sat, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white, and waited. Clara was led in by Dr. Sharma. She was smaller than he remembered, swallowed by a gray, facility-issued sweatsuit. Her face was a blank slate, her eyes fixed on the floor. She sat in the chair opposite him, a chasm of silence and horror stretching between them. For a long minute, neither spoke. Leo's mind raced with the psychologist's advice. "Start with shared grief." "I miss her," he began, his voice cracking on the words. "I keep expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen, or the sound of her car in the driveway." Clara remained silent, but her jaw tightened. "I remember," Leo continued, forcing himself to look at her. Really look at her. "That time she tried to bake that 7-layer cake for my birthday and it collapsed, and she just sat on the floor, covered in frosting, and laughed until she cried. Do you remember that?" A single tear escaped Clara's eye and traced a path down her pale cheek. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Something bad happened in that room, Clara," Leo said, his voice soft as rain. "Something that scared you. I'm not mad. I need to understand. I need you to tell me what you were so afraid of." He leaned forward, pushing the box of tissues closer to her. "The handprint, Clara. You closed the door. Why? Please, tell me." It was as if he had turned a key. Clara's blank facade fractured. A choked sob escaped her lips, then another. The dam of her own denial, the one she had held together for days with manic cleaning and intricate lies, finally broke. "She wasn't Mom," Clara whispered, the words tumbling out between gasps. "Not that day. She was different." Her confession wasn't a neat monologue. It was a chaotic, fragmented torrent of a child's trauma. She described the morning it happened. Their father was gone. The house was quiet, but their mother hadn't come out of her room. When Clara went to check on her, Eleanor was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, her eyes wide and vacant. "She was talking to someone who wasn't there," Clara cried, her body trembling. "She said the house wasn't safe. She said there were things in the walls, that I was tainted." The word hung in the air, grotesque and chilling. Clara described how Eleanor had grabbed her, her grip surprisingly strong, her face contorted into a mask of fear and paranoia that Clara had never seen. She wasn't their mother. She was a stranger, a terrifying stranger powered by the unseen demons of her illness. "She said she had to cleanse me," Clara sobbed, wrapping her arms around herself. "She was pulling me toward the bathroom. I was screaming. I told her to stop, that she was scaring me. But she didn't hear me. It was like she couldn't see me anymore." In a moment of pure, primal terror, fighting for her life against the woman she loved most, Clara had shoved with all her might. "I just wanted her to let go. I just pushed her away." Eleanor, unbalanced and caught by surprise, stumbled backward. Her feet tangled and she fell. There was a sickening hollow crack as the back of her head struck the sharp, unforgiving corner of the heavy oak dresser. And then silence. "She didn't move," Clara whispered, her eyes staring into the memory. "I said, 'Mom,' but she didn't answer. Her eyes were open. I touched her, and she was already gone." Panic, cold and absolute, had flooded the mind of the 12-year-old girl. She didn't think of calling 911. She didn't think of getting help. Her child's mind, shattered by what she had seen and done, latched onto a single, desperate, magical thought. "If I hide it, it didn't happen. If no one sees her, maybe she will just wake up." She described the Herculean effort of dragging her mother's body into the closet. She described wiping the small smear of blood from the dresser with a rag. She described pushing the closet door shut from the inside, leaving that tiny, damning handprint as she sealed away her impossible secret. The cleaning, the air freshener, the lies, they were all part of a frantic, hopeless ritual to rewind time, to erase the moment the world had ended. Leo listened, and the anger he had harbored was washed away by a tidal wave of pity, so profound it felt like drowning. He wasn't looking at a monster. He was looking at a child soldier, the sole survivor of a battle no one else knew was being fought. The confession changed everything and nothing. The law had to run its course. The media, catching wind of the story, descended like vultures. They didn't care about the nuance of mental illness or a child's terror. They cared about the headline, "The Closet Killer Girl of Maple Creek." Clara was condemned in the court of public opinion, painted as a cold, calculating monster. The legal system, faced with a case that was part accident, part self-defense, and part horrific cover-up, ultimately waved her into the juvenile psychiatric system. She was condemned to spend the remainder of her childhood locked away. Richard Vance, upon learning the full truth, collapsed inward. The news didn't absolve him, it implicated him. He saw Eleanor's death and Clara's actions as the final, bloody invoice for his years of emotional neglect. He had fled from his wife's illness, leaving his children to face the storm alone. He couldn't bring himself to visit Clara in the facility. He couldn't look at her without seeing his own failure. He condemned himself to a life of hollow guilt, a father to 2 children he had effectively lost. And Leo was condemned to remember. He had the truth, but it brought no peace. The image of his mother in the closet was now permanently intertwined with the image of her terrifying, sickness-induced rage. His love for his sister was forever mangled by the horror she had caused and the lies she had told. He was condemned to live in the gray, to pity the victim and the killer, who were tragically the same person. The murderer, Leo realized, wasn't just a person. It was a perfect storm. It was the crushing weight of undiagnosed mental illness. It was the quiet poison of neglect. It was the paralyzing, logic-destroying terror of a child. Everyone in the Vance family was condemned to it, chained to the memory of what it had done. 10 years later, Leo sat in the quiet of his own small apartment, a cup of coffee steaming on the table beside him. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was 27 now, a man who carried a quiet gravity that made him seem older than his years. In his hand he held a letter, the paper soft and worn. The return address was that of a transitional psychiatric facility 2 states away. He had received one every year for the past 8 years. He opened it. The handwriting was neat, feminine, no longer the frantic scrawl of a child. It was from Clara. It didn't ask for forgiveness, they were both long past that. It spoke of her progress in therapy, of the books she was reading, of her hopes to one day work with animals. It was the letter of a young woman trying to build a life from the rubble of another. At the end, there was always a single sentence. I went to the garden today. I saw a yellow lily and thought of her. Leo folded the letter. The grief was no longer a raw, open wound, but a part of his anatomy, a scar he had learned to live around. He looked out his window in the direction of his old town. The house on Maple Creek had been sold years ago. A new family lived there now, a family with young children whose laughter probably filled the hallways. Their life was built over the spot where his had ended. They would never know about the silence and the smell, about the tragedy that had once been sealed behind a closet door. He took a sip of his coffee. The murderer everyone should be condemned to, he thought, wasn't a person. It was the silence. It was the turning away. It was the failure to see the screaming until it was too late. He was condemned to that knowledge for the rest of his life. And in its own quiet, tragic way, that was his sentence.